gamble on something else. You must surely know you are crossing the line when you gamble on the one thing you are not allowed to gamble on. That is football. Well, hello again from the streets of Gosforth. Now, a quick weather update before we do go on. Yeah, it's relatively calm. I mean, it's still windy. Any other part of the world, this would be classed as a hurricane warning. But yeah, let's make video while the sun shines. Now, where the sun hasn't shone in the past couple of weeks is Newcastle. Yeah, storm clouds have been gathering. It was ever thus. Yeah, just when I thought I'd go away with England for a couple of weeks and there'll be a quiet fortnight on the domestic front. No, not so. We've had the co-owner in court earlier this week. We've had Sven Botman, the star defender, ruled out for between 6 and 9 months. We've had Louis Miley come back from England duty with a back injury, and that is before we get to the subject which dominated Eddie Howe's press conference this morning, and that was the news that Sandro Tonali this week has been hit by 50 fresh allegations from the Football Association of gambling on matches while a Newcastle player. Now, what did Eddie have to say about this? He was pretty strong, he was pretty consistent, as he has been from the very start on this subject, and that was his belief that Sandro Tonali has a gambling addiction. He called it an illness repeatedly today. I think 5 or 6 times he used that word, and he pleaded with the English FA to consider it as thus. You know, he said any other illness, again using that word, will be treated with far more sympathy and understanding. He said that the player himself, while, you know, admitting to everything that he's done wrong, he said he's suffered enough now and that he should be able to return to play at the end of August. Now, what is our information on that away from what Eddie said? And this was something we reported yesterday. Newcastle are confident or hopeful that any punishment, any sanction handed down by the English FA, and there ultimately, you know, there will be one, they hope that that runs concurrently to the current ban, like I said, which expires in August. Now, what is my take on that? I've got some sympathy with this, and that I think it's not Tonali's fault that the English FA, you know, their investigation has taken the best part of 4 or 5 months to arrive at this point. He handed over all relevant information back at the end of October, start of November. I also think as well, and this is the point Newcastle have made and which the FA understand, is that this is one period of addiction. Now, while I get they are separate charges, you know, the ban for what he did in Italy, we're led to believe, you know, was isolated to gambling on football matches over there, quite historic as well, you know, dating 4 or 5 years back to his time at Brescia and a teenager. While he's continued to gamble as a Newcastle player, it is still that same period of addiction as the phrase I would use, and as thus Newcastle are hoping there will be an element of, you know, avoiding double jeopardy. My own take is I agree with that, and you know, I think that probably will likely be the case, but we just don't know. You know, this has yet got to go to an independent FA regulatory commission. I struggled with that phrase on radio last night, but anyway, no, this is so to that end Newcastle don't yet know, you know, and we don't actually know the nature of the charges against Tonali. Now, has he gambled on matches involving Newcastle? Most likely, it's what he admitted to in Milan. It was his agent almost presented the defence, the mitigation, it was like a superstition. We don't know if he's continued to do that. If he has, we're all of the bets for Newcastle to win matches. So we just don't know. But where I've got less sympathy is, yes, while issues around addiction and gambling addiction are complex, and I agree with Eddie Howe to a certain extent, this should be treated like any other illness. It's something which you know, affects and afflicts a personality, and when you are trapped in that spiral, it probably is, you know, very hard to emerge from. But at the same time, if you are gambling, you've got a problem with gambling, the one thing you cannot bet on is A, football, and B, matches involving your own team. And the fact that it looks like Sandro Tonali has continued to do that as a Newcastle player, if I was the club, I'd feel pretty let down by that. Now, I asked Eddie Howe directly this morning that question, you know, do you feel let down by Tonali? He said no. Again, he stayed on message with, I think the club said at the start, you know, Eddie said they were going to wrap their arms around him, protect him, and I can see why they've done that ultimately for the health of the club and for the good of the player long term. I think it's the right decision. That doesn't mean supporters, observers, that we can't comment on it. And I think Tonali still has a little bit to answer on here. And that goes back to the point I make about gamble on something else. You must surely know you are crossing the line when you gamble on the one thing you are not allowed to gamble on. That is football. Beyond that, gambling on your own team. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure that is as much motivated by addiction or some other reason, you know, you're gambling on something you could influence, you know. Could you even argue it was a case of greed, or you're motivated by financial gain, given, like I said, you know, you have an ability to influence that result, albeit for the better. We expect, yes, a punishment to be handed down, but Friday to be backdated or to run concurrently, meaning Sandro Tonali will return in August. If it goes beyond that, well, wow, this transfer is already a disaster, you know. I said at the time, you know, when this original story dropped, that there was shock, there was eyebrows, now this one is hard to say, eyebrows raised as to why Milan was so willing all of a sudden to sell their captain, the star player. We went back to the San Siro with Newcastle in September when Tonali played, and wow, the reception he had that night, it just made me think even further. Why did they sell this guy? He sat with us in the press conference the night before, and unprompted he spoke about his difficulty settling in Newcastle, his love for Milan, and you just got the impression that night that there was some, I'm talking about hindsight here, but you know, with the benefit of hindsight, there was certainly something lurking, and during that period it was evidently still at the height of his gambling addiction. Listen, the transfer has been a disaster. Newcastle have tried to cling to the positives in that, you know, that this period gives him a chance to learn the language, to adapt, to get better know his teammates, and when he returns he'll be like the proverbial new signing. It ignores the fact that even before the ban was revealed, he'd almost played himself out of the team a little bit and didn't look like the £52 million mark he's signing they needed in that midfield. So I think, you know, from a club level, whether that's Dan Ashworth, Eddie Howe, the owners, whoever it is involved in this transfer, they've all got a hell of a lot to answer to. And I suppose the only hope for them now is that Tonali does return better for the absence in August. But I still think there's a huge amount of doubt around that. And for me, I would say that an element of trust has been eroded, given that he willingly signed for a club, knowing he had an addiction, and then continued to feed that by gambling on matches over here. Newcastle, or at least Eddie Howe, says otherwise. He's protecting the player, he's supporting the player. I get that, and you know, like I said, to a certain degree, I absolutely go along with that, because you know, addiction is a serious thing, and I do have a lot of sympathy with the player in that regard, and I do hope myself that the ban is contained within the next period of months and not beyond August. But no, it's complex, this one, and it also goes back as well to, you know, what did Milan know? Newcastle launched that investigation at the time. Their legal guys, everyone at the club basically was all over it. They wanted to know quite why this transfer, such a big transfer, one they had to get right, why it had gone so badly wrong. Now, no legal action has since followed. I think it's a very difficult thing to prove. Did Milan know at the time that an investigation was down the tracks? You know, we've got to read between the lines on that one, but the situation is what it is right now. It's not good, it's a bit of a mess, and you can only hope that from all aspects of it, lessons are learned for Newcastle. Now, on the subject of lessons learned, injuries, and the big news from the international break, I was actually sat at St George's Park waiting to speak to Everton's Jared Branthwaite when I got wind that Sandro Tonali was set to have an operation. He'd suffered the ACL problem down at Manchester City. He was going to be out for between 6 and 9 months. Now, when Jared Branthwaite came in, my very first question should have been, do you fancy Newcastle this summer, given he plays in the same position as Botman? Now, we spoke to Eddie about this morning, and he revealed that, and this has been a long-running saga. There's been a lot of discourse around this, a lot of disagreement, a lot of suspicion over exactly what has happened. Now, Botman first suffered the injury back in September. He was out for a period of time. He then returned without, you know, there'd been no surgery, even though, as Eddie said today, Newcastle's medical staff had advised that he should do. Botman, we're led to believe, went to get a second opinion. He was told it was only a partial tear of the ACL, and as a result he could then, you know, return to play and it would repair itself. It was clear watching him play he wasn't the same player as last season, when for me he was one of the best defenders in the league, and arguably, you know, the key component, the biggest difference between the defence of old and the new defence, really. I thought he was absolutely tremendous, and wow, what a steal at £32 million. He hasn't looked like that player this season. He hasn't looked like £3.2 million. And that is the frustration, that even though Botman, as Eddie said this morning, made the decision not to have surgery when the club wanted him to do so, even when he returned, why didn't they then look at it and realise that this wasn't the same player and intervene earlier? Instead, it's gone on and on and on, and he's now suffered Last week it was being described as a fresh injury. Eddie Howe today has said it's an aggravation of the old one. I think the truth on that is probably somewhere in between. What I take from that is actually that, yes, while it's part of the old injury, the partial tear, he's now probably suffered a full tear. So in some ways it is a new injury, but it emanates from the old problem. What a mess that is. And it just comes back to, while you can say so much about this season, or at least it's been claimed a lot about this season in terms of injuries, is unfortunate. Come on. There's a big enough body of evidence now to suggest that a serious review of, and this goes across the board, there's no one individual here. It goes back to training methods, recovery, it goes back to the diagnosis of injuries, the treatment of injuries, the programme to play. Newcastle must be one of the only clubs, I don't know, I might be getting this wrong, but that you never seem to see the players playing in the 21s. They're generally thrown straight back into the first team, and lo and behold, invariably, how many reoccurrences have they had this year? I'm probably going to miss a player off here, but Alexander Isak, Joe Willock, Sven Botman, Jacob Murphy, all of these players who have had recurring problems. Harvey Barnes has come back in, and while, this latest injury isn't a recurrence, he nonetheless had a setback, and he's returned from the foot problem. So, like I said, I use that phrase, a big enough body of evidence now, not to just write this off and say, oh, come the summer, everything's going to be okay, there'll be a period where everyone comes back. No, I think they've got to seriously look at the whole, style of play. Have they got players who are robust enough to live within what Eddie Howe wants? I just think if they just think it's all going to go away, they'll go into next season and the same thing will happen again. On Botman, he now is looking at it between 6 and 9 months out, and what a shame. If they'd identified they had identified the problem, if they'd acted on the problem in September, October, even sort of, going into November time, if they'd done it then, he probably would have been back for the start of next season. As it is, they're probably going to be without him now for at least the first 1 or 2 months of the season, if not beyond that. And what a loss that is. And at a time when there are such financial constraints with regards FFP, to now have to redirect some of that pool of money to a centre-half in the summer, it just adds another problem, another headache for Eddie Howe and the owners. There is a game as well tomorrow, guys. We almost forgot about that. Speaking with Eddie Howe as well, and it's West Ham at home, followed by a quick fire Everton at home on Tuesday night. Now go back a year, you'd say, that's 6 points. Newcastle at home, back at Fortress St James's. As we're walking out the press conference today, a member of club staff said, big week, good 6 points. I said, well, yeah, in theory, but I've got no confidence now in what this team will produce. I was down at Manchester City where, while I thought the performance was okay, it was fine, there was just an inevitability to that defeat, and yes, that comes against Manchester City, who are absolutely wonderful. And on the back of that, my desk in London asked me to want me to write an article about where Newcastle are at as a club, as a team, a really difficult season, but they wanted my take on it. And what I wrote was that, and this is the point I've made previously, and this article got a lot of traction, thank you for that. Some comments agreed, some didn't agree. That's fine, that's good. The point I made was that what people, and I think this isn't really aimed at supporters, this is people beyond Tyneside, and these are the guys, I was almost talking to the guys down in London who commissioned the piece. It was an illusion. The idea that Newcastle had arrived, they were this big club, and they were set there, burst into the top 4, and that was where they were going to stay. It was never really the case, and the analogy I used was that the head was moving too fast for the tail, and when that happens, a club, an organisation becomes stretched and cracks appear. That is what we've seen with Newcastle this season. And the analogy I used in the piece was that while on Saturday night we had Bruno Guimaraes versus Anthony Gordon at Wembley, showcase friendly, Brazil versus England, two of Newcastle's best players on display, while that gave the illusion, not the illusion, it's really, while that gave the impression and the indication of, prosperity and good health. Meanwhile, in Dubai, Eddie Howe could barely organise a five-a-side between fit senior players. That is what I mean about the club being stretched at present, and that extends to off the field as well. While the front of it was moving really quickly into the Champions League, the glitz and glam of that, PSG at St James's Park, elsewhere, commercially, ticketing, so many different areas, they're still playing catch up. Like I say, it was a mirage. The fact that Newcastle arrived and they're beating PSG 4-1 in the Champions League was never really the reality. That works, and that is the case. Like that, I don't think that's a negative or a positive, and people always come back at you negative. Well, it's not negative if it's realistic, and that is what I've always tried to be true to paint a picture of where Newcastle United are at. And for me, this is a really big summer for them, because they've shown before it's not just about money. They don't just have to wait for, you know, for the tiller to click and all the commercial revenue to come in and everything like that. They've done it before. The first 18 months of the club, in terms of the recruitment, the coaching, the management, everything, they smashed it out the park. They were brilliant. They got it badly wrong last summer. That's a whole different video, which I'll probably revisit down the line. I've spoken about it enough this season, and you know, I'd like to think I was right on that, but that is also part of the reason why they've arrived at where they're at now. They've got to, this summer, they've got to review the medical, the recruitment, just everything. There are so many elements of the club that are just starting to come away at the seams during the course of this season. Yes, it's been bruising, it's been difficult, it hasn't been as they imagined. It could have been different, you know. I think for better care, better planning in certain aspects of it, I think it could have been another brilliant season. It's not to say they were always destined to revert back to this, but I do think it's a reality check, and I'll direct that article in the description below. Please go and comment. I got sidetracked there to a degree. I was talking about a game against West Ham, and what do I think will happen tomorrow? Well, go back to what I said previously. I don't really know. I don't know what Newcastle are going to turn up. I never do these days in terms of fitness. Tino Livramento, Kieran Trippier and Harvey Barnes all have a chance of being involved tomorrow. But minus Sven Botman, it feels like it'll be largely pretty much the same group who went against Manchester City. And when you look at that team, I think that contains 6 players who were here pre-takeover, and it just goes back to the point I've just spoken about that idea of illusion, and you know, a group who were riding a magic carpet. Everyone was dragged to a level, to a plane beyond what they would ordinarily be capable of. That's come back down to earth a little bit now, and to that end, you know, a game against West Ham, I was down at the reverse fixture at the London Stadium. I thought Newcastle should have won that day. I wasn't massively impressed by West Ham, but in the time since, like I say, I've just lost that element of trust with what Newcastle are going to turn up. 2 players who will be playing tomorrow I want to pick on. You know, I was away, pick on in a nice way. I was away with England, like I say, the past fortnight, and I thought Anthony Gordon and Jared Bowen were 2 who have played their way massively into contention for the Euros. Now Gordon, debut against Brazil. I thought on the night there was only Jude Bellingham who was better than him, and that's not bad company to keep. We spoke to him afterwards. I'll say this as well, you know, all of my colleagues on the national beat, Gordon sat down with us twice to speak to the media, and they were really taken with him. And he is, you know, this idea, this reputation he left Everton with, it's just not the case. He's a good character, he's intelligent, he's enthusiastic, he's genuine. I think he's put himself right in contention now for that place that I would take him. I'm biased, but Jared Bowen as well. He then goes and starts against Belgium 3 or 4 days later. And I thought he was brilliant. You know, I thought he played with real verve, attacking intent. There was someone who was grabbing his chance internationally. So, let's build tomorrow as Gordon versus Bowen, and it might be the case that one of those 2 does emerge as the match winner. Now, I'll be there at St James's Park, and I'll be back post-match, guys, with my thoughts. Like I said, links in the description below to stuff from the Daily Mail during the past week and today. And yeah, please join me again in 24 hours time. Thank you for watching. Please, again, hit like, comment, subscribe. Really appreciate all the interaction. It really is brilliant stuff. And enjoy the game tomorrow, and I'll see you soon. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.